Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we're going to take a look at Seth Lundy out of Penn State, Gradey out of Kansas, and Jordan Hawkins from UConn, and how they use their actual shooting and their movement shooting capabilities to their advantage, not only as just perimeter shot makers, but also as cutters, slashers, and other areas of the game to help their team win. We're also going to take a look at Duncan Robinson and Kevin Huerter, who are currently in the NBA and have been great in three-point shooting mechanics and doing a lot of great things with their footwork as well. We're going to compare those players to kind of what Gradey, Jordan Hawkins, and Seth Lundy are currently, and kind of just discuss how movement shooting can be beneficial. If you guys do enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and now let's jump over to the whiteboard. So let's start with kind of the primary look that a lot of NBA teams like to run out of. Of course, that's kind of high pick and roll or spread pick and roll, where you see kind of this basic 4-out spacing. Right here we have our star player. That would be your LeBron James, Luka Doncic, Trae Young, whatever player you're essentially playing through. Typically a point guard, but doesn't always have to be. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, high usage players typically in this role. And when we get to that high pick and roll, 5 comes up and sets a middle screen oftentimes. Sometimes sets it toward the baseline. You could always empty out this corner if you wanted to, but sometimes we see that, sometimes we don't. And the whole point of shooting, and people love to talk about spacing the floor, that's really what we're talking about kind of out of these sets, because as our star takes this ball downhill, we're trying to keep the defenders in a spot where we can utilize this action as kind of just a two-man action and hopefully look to generate advantage. But if, say, our 4-man here is not a good shooter, well then of course the defense is naturally going to find themselves doing a little bit of this and using 3 guys to defend 2 in the pick and roll. So think about when Philadelphia, say, had Matisse Thybulle. This would be an issue that they would run into trying to get Joel Embiid the ball on rolls, which is why they ultimately ended up trading Thybulle away, because when you're talking about shooting, of course, that's really the first thing we're looking for is, can you space the floor? Can you be a reliable spot-up shooter? You'll see a clip of Seth Lundy being a good spot-up option, and that's something a lot of NBA teams are looking for, is just trying to find ways to space out the floor off of their star here in this situation so that they can open up the paint, let this guy be a lead decision maker, and ultimately kind of run the show for the team while being able to put effectively these outside defenders in binds of, okay, if I can't step in and help, how do these 2 guys defend the action? Some teams will try and switch, some teams will try to hedge and recover, but there's a lot of difficulties in those sets and those actions defensively if you don't do them properly. So teams look to try and generate 2-on-2 advantage out of the pick and roll. So first of all, spot-up shooting is really the first thing that we look for when you're looking at an evaluation process, which all of the shooters in this draft that I'm going to talk about in this video, they're all good spot-up shooters. That's kind of the baseline of being a good NBA shooter. So the next step up as a shooter is being able to relocate. And I think that's something you hear a ton on NBA broadcasts. I don't think it's too crazy, so we're not going to spend too long talking about relocation, but it is a super important part of being a good NBA shooter, and specifically a very good NBA movement shooter. You have to have natural relocation skills, which the prospects we're highlighting today, Gradey, Jordan Hawkins, Seth Lundy, they all have those type of relocation skills. They have all those movement skills that you're looking for as kind of a movement shooter in the NBA. So let's say here our point guard's got the basketball, and let's say he's trying to get a middle drive off the wing. You notice our 2 here is in a spot where perhaps his guy, with the guy riding his hip, would look to maybe pinch in a little bit. This is probably the most standard form of relocation in the NBA, is just kind of wing spacing and being able to slide over a little bit, generate kind of that open passing lane over here to the shooter. Again, very standard, very typical, very easy to understand the importance of movement shooting. So in this setting where our movement shooter is actually over here in the corner, the important thing to watch for, again, if we get middle dribble drive penetration, obviously the first thing you'd expect is, okay, maybe this help defender, weak side, comes over and steps in, which makes this pass across pretty easy. But sometimes with the way teams defend, or if the on-ball defender's doing a great job, he might cut him back off here. So instead of just looking for that little easy, nice little pass off the weak side, I think the next step is being able to read your defender's eyes, where they're looking and if they can see you or not. And these prospects do a very good job of that, of identifying, look, I'm out of his sight line, I'm out of his vision. Now if I relocate down the court or back up the court a little bit, I might be able to open up a passing window right past the ear of the defender into one of these spots and generate an open look for myself. These prospects do a very good job of that as well. And that's kind of the little bit more advanced form of relocation in just kind of the simple playing off the dribble drive. But these prospects all do a very good job of it. So our next off-ball action, and one that's growing more and more in popularity in the NBA, is the dribble handoff, specifically utilizing kind of your 5-man as somewhat of a ball handler to set this action up. In a lot of sets, we end up seeing the 5 popping up and catching the ball around the top of the key. Off of this, the 1 can go down into the corner, and you're kind of operating with a massive amount of space across the middle of the court for your movement shooter to kind of utilize, and you're getting a really nice spread court where it's going to be hard for anyone outside of the action to be able to help in defensively. Off of that, we'll see kind of the shooter. It's usually his job to give the 5-man a good window or good handoff spot. One of the best in the league at this is Duncan Robinson, Kevin Huerter for the Sacramento Kings. Both of them do a very good job as well. Throughout this segment of the video, you'll see some clips of those two guys utilizing the dribble handoff and to its fullest potential and what it can really be, how good it can be for NBA teams when used properly with a good screener and with a good dribble handoff user, which I think some of these players in this class can definitely grow into, because there's some traits that you definitely need. The shooter, typically the first thing they're looking for is, hey, can I get a shot off here? And you'll see clips of Duncan Robinson and Kevin Huerter letting it fly from behind the three-point line off of these dribble handoffs, because they do a great job not only leveraging their shot making into actual three-point baskets, but also using the screener to open themselves up. And you'll notice a lot of quickness when they're operating through these sets. That's the first thing, is when you're a shooter off the ball, you have to be a pretty quick trigger, quick decision maker off of certain openings, because teams, trust me, on the scouting report say, oh my gosh, this guy can shoot, we better cover him. So you have to be pretty creative in finding ways to go about countering that and being aggressive when you have opportunities and looks. And sometimes that's why we see some of the best movement shooters shoot a lower percentage. It's because they're shooting some of the highest difficulty shots in the league, but they're still generating actual points for their team, and it gives you a whole nother dynamic of offense to run through. And out of that, there's a lot of other things you can do too here. So off of this first action, we get that screen rescreen. I'm going to erase some of these passing lines here so it's a little bit more clear. Off of this, we get that first handoff and we get the screen. Let's say that there's no actual shot here. Off of this, sometimes you can turn this back into a screen rescreen action where the first handoff was kind of your original screen, but then you get a second one where, now remember, the defender's momentum is carrying them that way, but you're flipping your hips and coming back around to the other side, which I think can be really beneficial. And it almost turns into just a natural flowing pick and roll where your 5-man, who is your handoff guy, can start working downhill, and your shooter, who everyone's worried about behind the three-point line, is typically given kind of a little bit of a runway in this area of the floor, and it puts the 5-man defender in a really tough spot to comfortably defend. Now, a big part of the dribble handoff is to beat drop coverage. We saw that a ton in the first round between the Miami Heat and Milwaukee Bucks, where Brook Lopez, predominantly a drop coverage big, very good at it, by the way. Duncan Robinson got pretty much every single look he wanted in the dribble handoff game because Bam's such a good screener and Duncan Robinson's such an effective user of the dribble handoff, and with how much space he was allowed to have from that, it was some of the easiest. It was basically target practice for Duncan Robinson in the first round of the playoffs, and it was a big reason why the Miami Heat were able to upset the Milwaukee Bucks in as few as 5 games, because Duncan Robinson was an absolute flamethrower in that series. And I think the players in this draft, Gradey, Dick, Jordan Hawkins, Seth Lundy specifically, guys we're focusing on in this video, possess some of those same traits as well. And some of the traits that you need to be able to have to operate out of this is, one, a good mid-range jump shot. You want to be a threat from that spot on the floor, kind of this open box that we're talking about. But you also have to have some downhill playmaking a little bit. You have to have a pretty comfortable handle. Plus size also helps a lot. So you think about Gradey Dick, that's a huge benefit for him that he's about 6'7", 6'8"-ish. compared to Hawkins and Lundy, who are a little bit smaller. I think it's a huge benefit for Gradey Dick, and perhaps why he's the best actual shooter in this year's draft. But then you also look at kind of off the dribble capabilities and what these players are capable of doing. Gradey Dick specifically really likes to shoot moving left, and I think that's going to be a really great tool for an NBA team, as long as his head coach understands and realizes that, to utilize him in dribble handoffs, again, attacking to the left and setting himself up in situations where he's going to be able to go fading toward his preferred hand as a shooter and getting into a nice solid base. And this next action is a little bit more complex than what we've talked about so far, and it's very prevalent in UConn's offense as well. A big part of the reason as to why they won the national title this past year is their ability to generate high quality shots out of actual real movement, out of planned sets and design plays that worked very, very well. And a big reason why is Jordan Hawkins. So you're going to see a ton of Jordan Hawkins in this segment of the video, and we're of course looking at stagger action and some pin down action as well, kind of the important elements of that lead into good quality looks, especially if you have a player who understands how to use these type of actions for movement's sake. So let's start with kind of a very simple kind of pin down staggery type look where Jordan Hawkins, let's say he's starting out off the block here, kind of working up the gut of the court. That's really an important aspect, but it's all going to start here with the 5-man kind of setting up for a nice little screen down. So he's working toward the hoop but away from the ball. And out of that, Jordan Hawkins, then it's his responsibility to not only take the screen but use it appropriately, where he's angling himself kind of toward the point of the court, right at the top of the key, looking for the basketball right there. And Jordan Hawkins, what he does better than pretty much any other prospect in this draft is he actually finds a way to set his feet, get balanced while moving away from the hoop, but still jump and shoot vertically, which is a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of core strength, takes really phenomenal footwork, which is what Jordan Hawkins has. Now your question might be, well, why don't teams just switch this action? Because pretty easily the 5-man could step up there, but part of it is mismatches. You're looking at a spot on the floor here where if they're switching, think about it, Jordan Hawkins' defender is right here now. The 5-man has an easy slip to the hoop for a pretty low seal, and you're also getting a mismatch with Jordan Hawkins matched up with a center likely. So switching is, easy to kill some actions, but there's also negatives and bad consequences out of those things. The next part that makes Jordan Hawkins really dangerous though, and this is kind of an underrated element of movement shooting. Again, when you think about movement shooting, you're assuming a lot of three-pointers go up, a lot of perimeter looks, and those are a big byproduct of this type of offense and this type of movement. But I think one really important thing when it comes to movement shooting is the amount of pressure they put on a defender, to the point where typically Jordan Hawkins' defender, first of all, when he's screening, isn't even looking to help at all on the screen, something I think you can utilize in a bunch of different ways as well. But when he is running off of these screens, typically the defender becomes what we call a chase or a trail defender, where he's most focused about staying attached to Jordan Hawkins and not cheating under any of these actions because of Hawkins' three-point shooting ability. Hawkins knows that, so when the ball comes to him from the guard here, and he catches the ball at the top of the key, instead of just always rising up into a shot, he has flashed the ability to put the ball on the deck, whether it's a one dribble pull-up, which you're going to see, gets to this spot on the floor and he knocks it down, or he can actually take the ball with a live handle and get all the way down to the rim with his athleticism. That's really important. And again, out of this, just like we talked about with the dribble handoff, this almost turns into a pseudo pick and roll, where the 5, who is your last screener, can also work his momentum then down to the rim and give you kind of that 2-on-1 opportunity, because if the 5 is the guy helping defensively, your 5-man should theoretically be open on the backside. And that's where, if you have more shooting on your team in general, let's say the 4-man over here is a pretty potent shooter, it's really hard for a team to counter and defend some of these looks, because you're worried about, hey, this is one pass away right now, it's a very easy pass to make, and it's a very good open look out of the corner in the NBA. You can't just help off of that all the time. So because of that, teams get put in a bind because of all of these actions. It's a really unique, complex way for teams to kind of work around and use their shooters to their benefit. Another example from Gradey Dick this past season was on some of these pin down actions where his defender would be a little over aggressive trying to get through the action and blow kind of the set up. And Gradey Dick does a very good job reading that. DeJuan Harris trying to get play called here. He's trying to get this action run, and the big man goes down to set a screen, and you actually see that in this situation, the defender on Gradey Dick's trying to play over top of him, kind of giving him that lane to the rim because he's trying to get through this action with Gradey Dick simultaneously to cut it off. Gradey Dick does a good job here, kind of walking him through the screen, getting over to this spot of the screen, and then realizing, yeah, now he's past my screener's hips. I can flip my own hips, and I have a rim run that's perfectly open for a backdoor lob. And Gradey Dick did a very great job of not only just these two actions that I showed you, but just being an intuitive cutter in general this year. Seth Lundy did a decent job of it as well, especially when he was denied out on the perimeter. Seth Lundy, I think, is a little bit of a slower operator. I think a little bit longer decision maker, whether it's on or off the ball. The next off-ball action I want to highlight quickly. Now, we don't see this a ton in the NBA. I actually think it's a little underexplored. I do think there's more opportunities for it than we currently see executed in the NBA, but it's very simple. It's an elevator action. You'll probably see this at any high school basketball game you go to. It's pretty prevalent for generating open looks for shooters because it's really difficult to defend, because it's kind of the best way to defend. It goes against all logic and how you want to defend, usually keeping your chest between your man and the basket. That's probably the best off-ball positioning you can have. But out of it, what you typically see is the shooter is going to work up the gut of the court again. And off of this, when the guy's on his way up, typically your two biggest players are going to form elevator doors. And what that looks like is a real slim opening for the two to slide through, get to his spot, and behind it, without setting a moving screen, they'll each take a half step in and shut off that lane through them, through their shoulders. So if you're defending this, if you're the one chasing Jordan Hawkins, you either have to beat him to this spot, which means you have to be, again, giving him kind of the rim and be willing to let him maybe fake the action and just slip back door again. Or out of that, you have to be willing to try and work around and get on the outside of it, which is very tough to do because it's a longer pathway to the ball. So because of that, you're going to give up a lot of pretty good looks out of this elevator action. Our final off-ball action I want to talk about in this video is Spain action, which is typically where you use your best shooter or a good shooter in general to either set a back screen or some type of screen for a big man, kind of as an inverted screen when the big man doesn't have the ball. Now, there's ways that teams get into this. You're going to see a clip here where Jordan Hawkins sets a screen kind of on a baseline out of bounds play. Not your typical form of Spain, but still somewhat of a Spain action. Now, Spain typically refers to the pick and roll, which is what I'm going to show you here. Again, this is super prevalent in the NBA, one of the most frequently ran sets. Pretty much all 30 NBA teams run this in some form or another. So I think it's a great one to look at. Typically what's going to happen here is the one's going to start by getting to a side. And it's really important that a lot of teams like to get to the side where the shooter is, because you're going to empty out this side of the floor then when the shooter makes this action, which is going towards the gut of the floor. Now off of this, you can see on the pick and roll, you have an entire spread court. Okay, your five, when he rolls, there's not going to be a strong side help defender really in there other than the shooter's matchup, which already puts the defense in a pretty tough bind. But to make matters worse here, remember, here's the defender of the five now. He's over here hedging a bit, and the one's defender is getting screened right here. The two's defender is going to be probably chasing because he's worried again about this guy being a shooter and all the other sets that we've already shown where this guy's been running off a bunch of screens and doing a whole bunch of stuff without the ball. These guys tend to get put in a spot where they have to be a little bit tunnel vision on their matchup, which is what makes Spain so deadly, because he's going to come in here and he's going to set a firm back screen on the five defensively. Out of that, when the guard comes back towards the middle of the floor, it might open up that driving lane. It's essentially a double screen if they're switching, or if they aren't switching and they're just trying to hedge and recover, if the five-man properly rolls out of this, and this is a good, strong, firm screen, The defensive 5 has an issue with trying to get back into this play, opening up a lot of aerial lob space. Over here for, again, there's no strong side help defender. This opens up a lot of just generic space in general. Then outside of that, you're also looking at the ability for the actual shooter, after setting that screen, to be a nice flare out option back to the perimeter. So if you don't get anything on the actual look, on the initial pick and roll, you have a pop action. It's not a pick and pop because the 5-man is still rolling, but you do have a popper out of the middle of the floor, which is a pretty deadly option and something that's found a ton of success in the NBA, because anytime you're involving 3 guys through a variety of either switches or hedge and recovers, or playing at the level of the screen just in general and trying to maybe blitz the ball, you have 3 guys trying to guard 3, and it puts the defense in a really tough spot because you have an isolated half of the court typically open to do a lot of work out of. And I think it puts the defense in a really tough spot because you have to keep track of where the shooter is. He's super deadly as a shooter. The 5-man's probably getting an open roll to the rim, and if you have a really talented point guard, he might just be able to take this as open space anyway, and if you get help from this side, it's just a nice little kick out to the corner there. There's a ton of options out of this. Spain is, to be honest, one of the best actions in all of basketball. I'm a high school basketball coach. I use Spain, and I found a ton of success using it. It's really, really a great set overall, and something that's really difficult to guard, because if you run it right and you have players who can go through the looks, if you have a point guard who knows what he's doing, you're going to be really, really tough to stop. And I think shooters like Jordan Hawkins, Gradey, Dick, Seth Lundy can fill in these areas as the screener. Guys who have decent frames can set good screens, and they have the foot movement and the footwork to kind of work out of these actions and then again square up, set their feet, and finish. I really hope you guys did enjoy today's video. It was a lot of fun to record, talking about Seth Lundy, Gradey Dick, Jordan Hawkins, and how they really positively impact winning by being really lethal, dangerous shot makers and players who can work without the basketball in their hands, which is such a pivotal skill in today's NBA. If you did enjoy, again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content. I had a lot of fun recording this. Let me know down in the comment section below where you think these 3 players could end up on draft night.